FIFA is now canceling about 2,000 of its reserved hotel rooms in Philadelphia ahead of this summer's World Cup.
It's a non-affordable World Cup. The cries from all over the world accusing FIFA of treating the World Cup as a cow.
The ticket prices continue to be a problem. But here's the thing, it isn't just the fans. Even players' families can't afford these tickets.
World Cup 2026 was supposed to make America look unstoppable again. Instead, hotel bookings are collapsing, airlines are cutting flights, tourism demand is weakening, and international fans are increasingly deciding that traveling to the United States under Trump simply is not worth the trouble anymore. Nearly 80% of hotels across major U.S. host cities are reportedly tracking below expectations. FIFA has already started releasing thousands of unsold hotel rooms back into the market. Fuel prices are surging, international airfare is climbing fast, and tourism groups are warning that America's political climate is now actively discouraging foreign visitors. This is becoming a serious political and economic problem for the White House, because the World Cup was supposed to showcase American strength. Instead, it is starting to expose American instability. And while Washington struggles with growing backlash, Canada is quietly emerging from this entire situation looking calmer, safer, and far more stable. If you think Trump turned the World Cup into another self-inflicted crisis, subscribe now and let us know below, because the deeper numbers behind this story are becoming brutal. For years, politicians and organizers promoted World Cup 2026 as one of the biggest tourism opportunities in North American history. The numbers attached to the event were massive. FIFA projected more than $30 billion in economic activity connected to the tournament. American cities expected packed hotels, record restaurant traffic, booming transportation demand, and millions of international visitors flooding into local economies. But now, the tourism industry itself is sounding the alarm. Hotel groups across several host cities are reporting bookings well below projections. In some markets, operators reportedly said demand is barely outperforming a normal summer travel season despite the World Cup approaching rapidly. That is a huge warning sign, because local governments already spent billions preparing for this tournament. Airports expanded operations, transit systems increased spending, security infrastructure was upgraded, hospitality companies increased staffing and inventory expecting enormous international demand. Instead, many businesses are now quietly lowering expectations. FIFA reportedly released major blocks of reserved hotel inventory back onto the market after demand failed to materialize the way organizers initially projected. And once that starts happening, confidence weakens very quickly. Hotels begin lowering prices, investors become nervous, tourism projections start getting revised downward. The economic gap between expectation and reality is becoming difficult to ignore. Dallas originally projected roughly $2 billion in local economic activity tied to the tournament, while New York and New Jersey officials estimated the final alone could generate more than $3 billion across the region. But recent hospitality data suggests many operators are now prioritizing occupancy over profit as booking momentum weakens. In several host markets, hotels reportedly began offering discounts of 20 to 35% compared to their earlier World Cup pricing strategies, after international demand failed to accelerate at the pace organizers expected. That is not what a tourism boom looks like.
The second problem is transportation, and this issue could become even more damaging than weak hotel demand. The World Cup depends on millions of people moving efficiently between countries and cities over several weeks. Fans need affordable airfare, reliable routes, and confidence that their travel plans will not collapse at the last minute. Right now, global aviation markets are becoming more unstable by the week. Middle East tensions have pushed oil prices higher, creating sharp increases in jet fuel costs across the airline industry. Multiple international airlines are already warning about weaker profitability and possible route adjustments if energy volatility continues through the summer. That directly impacts the World Cup. Air Canada has already suspended or reduced several U.S. routes earlier than expected. WestJet scaled back parts of its American network. International carriers are increasingly prioritizing profitability over expansion as operating costs rise. And the price shock for travelers is becoming severe. Industry estimates suggest international airfare into major North American host cities could rise another 15 to 20% if oil markets remain unstable. Meanwhile, some hotel operators in major U.S. cities initially pushed room rates above $700 per night before weak bookings forced many to start cutting prices again. At the same time, ticket resale prices for high-profile matches have exploded. For many international fans, attending the World Cup is now becoming financially unrealistic. And once fans begin deciding the trip is too expensive, demand falls fast. That is why this story is becoming economically dangerous for Washington. Because the tournament was supposed to generate tourism momentum during a difficult economic period. Instead, it is amplifying concerns about inflation, affordability, and instability.
Then comes the issue nobody in the Trump administration wants to discuss directly: global perception. The United States under Trump increasingly looks politically exhausting to many international travelers. Concerns surrounding immigration enforcement, airport screenings, visa delays, detentions, and political tensions are now directly affecting tourism confidence. Travel behavior is emotional. People spend money where they feel comfortable. They travel where they feel welcomed. And many international visitors no longer associate the United States with stability or openness. That shift matters enormously for an event built entirely around global enthusiasm. Tourism forecasts for the United States already weakened significantly throughout 2025, despite earlier expectations for strong growth. Canadian travel into the U.S. reportedly dropped sharply as trade tensions and political hostility damaged cross-border confidence. That should deeply concern Washington, because once neighboring countries begin pulling back from U.S. tourism, the problem is no longer temporary, it becomes structural. And unlike tariffs or trade disputes, reputational damage can take years to reverse.
This is where Canada benefits from the contrast. Toronto and Vancouver remain central parts of the World Cup, but unlike the United States, Canada is not becoming the center of the controversy. There are no major international fears surrounding Canadian border raids, no widespread global concerns about political crackdowns, no growing perception that Canada is hostile to foreign visitors. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada has spent much of the last year presenting itself as stable, internationally cooperative, and economically predictable, while Trump continued escalating trade disputes, immigration rhetoric, and geopolitical tensions. That difference is now becoming visible to the world. International tourists increasingly see two different versions of North America. One appears politically volatile and expensive. The other appears calmer and easier to navigate. That alone creates economic advantages for Canada. Some travelers may extend their stays in Toronto or Vancouver while reducing time spent in the United States. Others may use Canada as their primary base during the tournament altogether. Canada does not need to outperform the United States economically to benefit from this. It simply needs to look more stable by comparison. Right now, that is exactly what is happening. Donald Trump wanted World Cup 2026 to become a global celebration of American power and economic dominance. Instead, the tournament is turning into a global stress test for the United States itself. Weak hotel demand, rising airfare, flight cuts, tourism hesitation, immigration fears, political backlash. All of it is now colliding with the biggest sporting event on the planet. Meanwhile, Canada has quietly positioned itself on the opposite side of that contrast. More stable, more predictable, easier to trust. And in a global economy increasingly driven by perception, that may end up becoming Canada's biggest advantage of all.
A confidant, indeed, of the Chancellor of Germany has raised the idea of a potential World Cup boycott in a German newspaper. This politician, Jürgen Hart, had said dropping out the tournament would only be considered as a last resort in order to get Trump to see sense on the Greenland issue, pointing out that Trump has made it clear how important the World Cup is to him.
Germany has just dropped a bombshell on the world's biggest sporting event, a World Cup boycott aimed directly at the United States, triggered not by football, but by Donald Trump's campaign to pull Greenland into America's strategic orbit. What began as a political provocation between Washington and Copenhagen has now exploded into a crisis threatening to destabilize the entire 2026 World Cup, and the ripple effect is spreading fast. One by one, European nations are reassessing whether they can, in good conscience or even in good security, compete on American soil while Trump turns the tournament into a stage for geopolitical leverage. Yet in the middle of this escalating storm, something remarkable is happening. As Europe looks for a way to stand its ground without abandoning the competition altogether, Canada suddenly emerges as the quiet alternative, the dependable co-host that isn't dragging world football into a diplomatic confrontation. What started with Germany's warning may soon reshape the entire map of the 2026 World Cup, separating the politically charged American venues from the stable, trusted Canadian ones.
The controversy erupted when influential German political voices began openly questioning whether their national team should refuse to play matches on American soil. This wasn't a fringe sentiment. It reflected a genuine frustration inside Europe over Washington's growing readiness to use the World Cup as an extension of foreign policy. Germany's warning created shockwaves almost instantly. Within days, similar questions surfaced in the UK, Scotland, France, and even the Netherlands, all countries that normally treat World Cups as untouchable. And the spark that ignited this movement was Trump's insistence that Greenland, a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, is essential to U.S. national security. The idea of pressuring an ally to concede territory was explosive enough, but when Trump linked his Arctic ambitions with economic threats and diplomatic leverage, European governments saw something much larger at stake: the erosion of long-standing norms within NATO and the broader international system.
This is a World Cup during particularly difficult, politically fraught times, where even if you are a citizen of a nation that will be allowed in, as far as we know, there's no guarantee of your safety.
At the same time, fans and supporters raised separate concerns that had been building since 2025, from stringent U.S. visa restrictions to the lingering anxiety around unpredictable immigration enforcement. The fear wasn't theoretical. Several African and South American supporter groups already warned that they might not be able to travel safely or in adequate numbers. This led many federations to an uncomfortable conclusion. Participating in a North American World Cup is one thing, participating specifically in Trump's America is another. And because the tournament is shared across 3 countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, Europe began asking whether a boycott had to be total at all. Why not avoid the American venues and continue the competition in cities that aren't defined by political confrontation? That question, more than anything, reshaped the conversation. From the moment Trump revived his interest in acquiring Greenland, the reaction across Europe was a mix of disbelief and strategic anxiety. Denmark immediately rejected the idea, calling Greenland's sovereignty non-negotiable. Several Arctic and NATO analysts highlighted the destabilizing effect of linking territorial ambition with a major international event. Rather than separating diplomacy from sport, Trump blurred the lines entirely, sending a clear message that he viewed the World Cup as a stage to amplify American power. That shift in tone had consequences. The United States was no longer seen simply as a co-host. It was seen as a political actor trying to imprint its agenda onto the tournament. European officials feared that participation could be interpreted as tacit acceptance of Washington's approach, an outcome they were unwilling to risk. The reaction from Germany captured that sentiment most clearly. When German officials described the World Cup as leverage that could be used to force Washington to see sense, it signaled a broader realization. The tournament itself had become part of the geopolitical equation. While Greenland was the spark, the deeper frustration runs much broader. Across multiple countries, European football associations and their governments quietly share the same concern. The United States under Trump is unpredictable. Visa rules change with little warning. Enforcement can be aggressive. Stadium security policies remain unclear. And the political climate inside the U.S. oscillates between polarization and unrest. For many officials, this is not a question of ideology, but of logistics and safety. They need to guarantee that fans can enter, travel, and attend matches without fear of detention or confrontation. They need clear rules and stable conditions, 2 things that have been in short supply. This explains why many of these federations did not talk about abandoning the tournament altogether. Instead, they began exploring the idea of shifting their presence to Canada or Mexico, where the political controversy does not exist. That's the subtle but important distinction. Europe isn't rejecting the World Cup. Europe is rejecting the risks attached to Trump's version of it. Greenland's position in this story matters to Canada in a profound way. Ottawa has long worked with Copenhagen on Arctic governance, shared defense strategies, and environmental management. Trump's claim that the U.S. needs Greenland for national security wasn't just provocative, it threatened a balance Canada has spent decades reinforcing.
That's why Canadian officials, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, responded by emphasizing the need for predictable, rules-based cooperation in the Arctic. Without directly attacking Washington, Carney positioned Canada alongside Denmark and other northern partners who reject the idea of territorial bargaining. In Europe, this stance did not go unnoticed. As Washington escalated the rhetoric, Canada became the calm, steady voice calling for restraint. For countries considering a boycott, this contrast matters. It reinforces the notion that avoiding U.S. venues is not abandoning the World Cup, it's avoiding unnecessary risk while respecting international norms that Canada openly supports. As the debate expanded, a pattern became clear. European teams and supporters repeatedly framed their concerns around American politics, not the tournament itself. That left Canada in an unusually strong position. It is a host nation without the controversy, without the diplomatic tension, without the immigration barriers, and without the geopolitical theatrics. Canada offers simplicity, straightforward entry rules, stable public order, and a political climate not defined by confrontation. For federations balancing diplomatic principles with the desire to compete, this is exactly what they need, a way to participate without endorsing Washington's strategy or exposing their supporters to uncertainty. Some commentators in Europe have already described 2026 as a split World Cup, where the American segment becomes politically charged, while the Canadian and Mexican segments become the functional heart of the tournament. Whether that prediction proves accurate will depend on what Europe decides, but the direction of travel is unmistakable. Germany's unexpected challenge has forced the world to rethink what the 2026 World Cup actually represents. Instead of a moment of North American unity, the tournament is now a symbol of a larger confrontation between Trump's vision of power and Europe's insistence on stability and sovereignty. And in this battle, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The world may still want to play, just not in America. As more European nations explore alternatives, Canada rises naturally into the spotlight, a co-host untainted by controversy and aligned with the international norms that Europe is determined to defend. Trump sought to dominate the World Cup. Instead, he may be watching the tournament quietly shift northward toward the one host nation the world still trusts. Trump planned to dominate the World Cup. Instead, Canada is becoming the real host the world trusts.